I would say with Alzheimer's, it is an interesting, if you can tolerate caffeine, there's a lot of associations between the caffeine and the chlorogenic lactones in coffee that they could have a symbiotic effect. So I think that if you can tolerate caffeine, that might be more in the direction you want to go in.
Hello, I'm Dr. Josh Helman, and it is my distinct pleasure today to introduce Andrew Salisbury, who's the CEO of Purity Coffee. And I feel really honored to be in the presence online of what I consider the world's expert when it comes to coffee and health. So
I appreciate the introduction.
And I mean, right now I'm thinking of probably 100 different questions I could ask you, but let's start with this.
Yeah.
How in the world did you get into the coffee business? Because I was doing some background research, and it says that you're British and you actually grew up drinking tea. So how did that transition happen? And tell me more.
Yeah, it was a sort of strange story. I mean, my background has never been in coffee. It's actually been in software for contact centers in Latin America. And I had a business, built it up and sold it. And then my wife and daughter and I traveled for about a year. And in that period of time, my wife, Amber, started getting some health issues. And she was just, low energy, difficult to get out of bed in the morning. And she'd often wake up, feeling very tired. So she did what a lot of us do at the time, is she self-medicated by drinking lots of coffee. And I was a tea drinker. And so there was many an argument where I was trying to persuade her that she needed to stop drinking coffee, because I felt like it was a little bit like she was putting one foot on the accelerator, one foot on the brake at the same time. And she was burning herself out, forcing her body to do something. So anyway, long story short, she basically said to me, look, before I give up my coffee, you better prove it to me. You have to validate that this really is bad for me. And so probably to win an argument, I don't say it's the noblest of motivations. I met with two professors at the Institute of Coffee Studies in Vanderbilt. And that sort of set me down the path where they explained to me just a long shopping list of the health benefits of coffee. And they could tell me all the things that I should pay attention to in coffee if I cared about coffee for health, but they couldn't tell me where I could buy a coffee that focused on health. And that's where I just felt like there's a lot of people like my wife who were told to give up coffee or reduce their coffee intake, and really that the advice was the wrong advice in a lot of different cases. So that sort of set me down that path.
So, but based on what you know today, is it possible that coffee, the less pure coffee that your wife was drinking at the time, could have been contributing to some of her health effects?
Yeah, I think so. I think that we'll never know. The problem with coffee is that you'll have things that could cause inflammation if it's a poor farming practices or the way that the coffee is roasted, and I can go through some of those things. And then there's also anti-inflammatory effects of coffee because of the chlorogenic acids in coffee. The higher those chlorogenic acids are, the cleaner the coffee is, the better it is for overall health. And so while I never really know whether that particular coffee, which wasn't of a very good quality, impacted her health, I'm pretty sure that she wasn't doing herself all of the favors she could have got from drinking a good quality coffee for health.
I understand. So this is a summit on preventing Alzheimer's. And we'll get back to coffee, but just a big picture. Why would a viewer who's trying to prevent or reverse Alzheimer's, why would they care about coffee? Have you seen cases? Have you read papers about the effect of coffee with Alzheimer's?
Yeah, so we were very lucky in the early stages. The professors at the Institute of Coffee Studies introduced me to Professor Adriana Ferrar from the University of Brazil. And she really is one of the world's health experts on coffee and health. And so we took a deep dive into all those things that could make a big difference on coffee and health. And one of the areas that we looked at there's over 19,000 studies on the health benefits of coffee. Is probably one of the most well-studied foods on the planet. The things that recurred were the benefits of coffee for Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, also various other things like 6 forms of cancer, reduction in type 2 diabetes, heart disease. And so that was all linked to basically the primary message that Adriana gave to me is, look, you've got to make sure that you have the most chlorogenic acids, the most antioxidants in your coffee, because they're the things that cause the health benefits, and then diminish any of the negative compounds. And so we started looking into the science of coffee and health. And so while we don't make any health claims, our premise of our business is that we want to avoid the bad stuff, maximize the good stuff, and let's rely and show the evidence of the 19,000 studies on coffee and health to say, this is generally a very good food for health. How could we improve it? And so one area we looked at is the relationship between chlorogenic acids and a thing called chlorogenic lactones. So one of the interesting things about coffee is you have all of these bioactive compounds in coffee, much more than caffeine, and they can be created and destroyed in the roast and also in the farming practices. So we designed a roast curve, which is basically to darken the coffee, which creates chlorogenic acids turn into chlorogenic lactones. And so those lactones, in a way, take a little bit of they hitch a ride with the caffeine through the blood-brain barrier into the brain. And so that's the thing that helps in terms of prevention. At least there's many of the studies point to the fact that the anti-inflammatory properties of coffee in general are based on the chlorogenic acids and the chlorogenic lactones. But chlorogenic lactones, which come from a slightly darker roast, without getting into too many sort of weird specifics, you want the roast to be dark enough where you have chlorogenic lactones, but not so dark that you create polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which you get from burnt food. And a lot of coffee companies will choose to over roast their coffee because they want to hide some of the defects and the problems that we talked about before and make coffee all taste uniform. So, a burnt coffee in Singapore tastes the same way as a burnt coffee in Seattle. So the more we sort of develop a taste for that sort of tart burnt coffee, that's one of the problems we have to deal with.
And I love this discussion because I have 2 degrees in biochemistry, but obviously we're not going to go super deep into the weeds but just for the general public here, chlorogenic acid is a historical name. It doesn't have chlorine. People don't have to worry that, I don't want chlorine in my coffee. No, chlorogenic acid is very different than chlorine.
It's a polyphenol, and it's very healthy for the body overall.
So I've read that the number one source of antioxidants for Americans is actually coffee. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. It's crazy, and we've actually, and it's not based on bad habits. I mean, a lot of people hear that and they say, the American diet, you must have a lot of problems if coffee is the number one source of antioxidants. If you look at sort of ORAC tables and measurements of antioxidant capacity in different foods, coffee always ranks very high. So does cacao, and so do a lot of spices. Peppermint is high, rosemary is high. But the only problem is that people aren't going to go and drink a cup of rosemary in the morning. And coffee is the one sort of supplement that you never forget to take. So the important thing about coffee is it's very high in antioxidants, but it's also something that you'll do repeatedly every single day. And that's the reason why it's the number one source for most people who drink coffee.
Let me ask you more about that and dive deep, because there's some people like myself, I love rosemary. So, I'll eat rosemary. I also take rosemary essential oils.
Right.
If people just take coffee essential oils? Is that a thing? And would you miss out on some of the benefits?
It's an interesting question. It sort of reminds me of one of the first questions that I posed to Adriana, which is that has anyone created a compound that comes from coffee that we could say, take this compound and it's going to reduce your risk of type 2 diabetes or Alzheimer's or any particular health concern? And she basically said that pharmaceutical companies had approached her and started to look at that. But the reality is coffee is a little bit like an orchestra. It's not a soloist. It's just the fact that there's so many different compounds that are relating to each other at the same time that at best you can sort of move in that general direction and not in specifics about particular compounds. And for that reason, truthfully, I don't know the answer to your question, because without doing that analysis on the essential oils, I couldn't say. But
well, I can tell you just from my experience as a biochemist and also as a physician, studying both traditional medicine and alternative medicine for many decades. Right. One of the concepts is you get many, many more health benefits normally from the whole plant, as opposed to a very small extract from the plant. So let's dive deep in from that lens with coffee. One of the products you sell is decaffeinated coffee. Do you think you miss out on some of the antioxidants if you're removing that caffeine from coffee?
Yeah, there's 4 methods to decaffeinate coffee, and so we've tested all of them. The ethyl acetate, and there's critical CO2, which is typically done in Germany. Swiss water process. The number one process for decaffeinating coffee is Swiss water process, because it's a natural process that uses basically an activated charcoal filter, and that traps the caffeine molecules in the filter, but it doesn't leach the antioxidants. The other methods leach the antioxidants in the coffee, which means that we can do everything right, all the way up to decaffeination. And then if we're finding that we're losing 25-30% of the antioxidants, then you lose that benefit. So we only use Swiss water method to decaffeinate the coffee, and then you'll get all the chlorogenic acids. But we have people who are very sensitive to caffeine. I mean, as you know, some people are fast metabolizers and some people are slow metabolizers of caffeine. So if you're a slow metabolizer of caffeine, it stays in your body for a long while. And people who have, let's say, mast cell activation syndrome or other things, those sort of where they're much more intolerant to caffeine, they really need a decaffeinated product. And if you get the right quality of product, then 90% of the value comes in, depending on the association that you make of coffee and caffeine. So caffeine has some benefits, but it's certainly not all of the benefits, not even close. The benefits typically come from the chlorogenic acids.
Right, that makes sense. And to be clear, caffeine is obviously an antioxidant, but with your Swiss water method, are you removing anything besides the caffeine, I guess is the question.
No, and we're very careful in our lab results and our tests to make sure that doesn't happen, the way that the compounds are reintroduced to the coffee. So, I mean, to be honest, I think that we've got I'm a little biased, but I think we have the best tasting decaf on the market simply because of a very high standards of the coffee in the first place. And then also the method of decaffeinating makes a big difference, especially if you're concerned about overall health. But I would say with Alzheimer's, it is if you can tolerate caffeine, there's a lot of associations between the caffeine and the chlorogenic lactones in coffee that they could have a symbiotic effect. So I think that if you can tolerate caffeine, that might be more in the direction you want to go in.
And that brings up my next question, is that the benefits for people in terms of preventing or reversing Alzheimer's or other neurologic problems like Parkinson's, is the positive effect of the coffee. Do you think it's from the stimulant effect from caffeine and other components in the coffee that will raise the dopamine levels in the parts of the brain, or do you think it's something else?
I think it's something else. I think it is the chlorogenic acids, the chlorogenic lactones, stregoniline, some of the lipids on the coffee like cafestol and kawiol. There really is just an orchestra of compounds, bioactive compounds that impact the health benefits of coffee. Caffeine is one of them. It's one we all know because we recognize what happens when we have our first cup of coffee in the morning, and that feels great. But the health benefits, I don't believe, come from, and the scientists really don't believe, come from solely caffeine. It can have an additive effect, but it's not the driver.
How often do you recommend people drink your coffee?
Sanjeev Chopra is on our advisory board, and he's the last dean of admissions at Harvard Med School. And he says the interesting thing about coffee, and he's written a number of books about coffee and health, is that the coffee is dose dependent. So that we don't know exactly the mechanistic explanations of the health benefits of coffee. We know some of the things that add to it and some of the things that detract. But he says it's dose dependent, which means the more coffee you can tolerate, the better it is for you. Typically, that sweet spot is around 400 milligrams of caffeine, though, because there's a relationship to the caffeine where you could drink a lot of coffee, especially decaf, and be fine in terms of health benefits. But after about 400 milligrams of caffeine, you'll start to see adverse effects from the caffeine by itself.
Right.
3 or 4 cups of coffee.
3 or 4 per day.
Per day.
And what I've found with myself and certain of my patients is if you're used to taking in 300, 400 milligrams of caffeine or whatever you take on a daily basis, and then you stop, you can get withdrawal headaches and things like that. What do you make about withdrawal headaches from caffeine?
It is really interesting, and this is only anecdotal. I mean, we've got 34,000 testimonials on our site, so I get a lot of feedback from our customers on a daily basis about what they feel. And the interesting feedback that I'm getting is when people start coffee after stopping coffee, or when they stop coffee, they don't have any of the side effects with good quality coffee or with our coffee. And I think the reason for that is people have some sensitivities they build up to pesticide residue, mycotoxins or mold that could be in coffee, some of the sort of heavy metals in coffee, or the staining of coffee, the lipids like the cafestol and the cowriol that get stale over time if you're not drinking your coffee within a sort of a reasonable period of, let's say, 15 to 20 days. So people often experience those side effects as a result of withdrawing from those things that they shouldn't be having in the first place, rather than coffee itself. But again, it's only anecdotal. We've never done any tests on that in particular, but our customers don't seem to get the same side effects, not just in withdrawals, but also in the fact that jitters, nervousness, anxiousness, that sort of thing, that's all a relation to bad quality coffee.
Fascinating. So it's not just basically all coffee is not the same. Another angle I'd love your input in is that I've seen clinically with patients is coffee will often increase their cholesterol levels.
Yeah.
And they'll notice when they stop drinking coffee, their cholesterol levels go down. Have you seen similar effects with your coffee?
We've had discussions about that. I mean, the lipids that could cause the cholesterol increase can be trapped with a paper filter. So if you're concerned about cholesterol levels, then a paper filter coffee would be great. If you're not concerned about them, and people have different perspectives on, what cholesterol really does in the body. So, French press is fine. Espresso is fine. I would say that if you are concerned about lipids and cholesterol levels, a paper filter is one of the best ways to handle that. But then there's meant to be very good health benefits that come from those lipids. So again, it's this now is when it comes down to, we want to produce the very best coffee we can for health, but then we're going to let people make the decisions they make on how to best brew that coffee and how they like it, because consumption is probably one of the most important things. I mean, making sure that you like the coffee that you drink. So.
Definitely. So one of the interesting things I found on your website was specifically the analysis. You can get the chemical analysis for pesticides and for toxins, like some of the mycotoxins, the mold toxins that people are exposed to. You can actually get the data from your own coffee and that of many of your competitors. Yeah. And I love the transparency. How current, how up to date is that information on your website? Like, can I look in the bottom of one of the bags and see from that batch what the information is like?
We test every harvest of coffee. So every coffee that comes in is tested. We are always testing. So, I mean, we're just finishing some tests at the University of Brazil, the University of Portugal right now that'll explain. We're providing single serve sachets so that we can measure what the positive compounds are in a cup of coffee against a measurement of some other food. So that's the process we're going through now, is starting to measure, okay, 1 cup of pocket purity is going to give you this number of antioxidants compared to blueberries or kale or that sort of thing. So it's very current, and we're always, one of the things that we measure is obviously the CGAs in coffee is a bit of a king of the castle. So what we're trying to do is we select the very highest from typically about 50 coffees from around the world, and then we're always trying to beat that coffee. And so that's led to a lot of innovations to try to improve the chlorogenic acids in the coffee that we started to do on a farm level and that sort of thing. But the shorter answer to your question is, yes, our testing is always available. It's on our site. It may not be completely updated every week sort of thing, but if you need any reports or any studies on any of our coffees, we've got those available.
Excellent. And let's dive deep into pesticides. What type of pesticides are you seeing in the coffee beans that are offered to you, and who's buying the coffee beans that are high in pesticides that you're not?
Yeah, well, we're not seeing any pesticides in the coffee that's offered to us because it has to be certified organic coffee as a starting point. And the reason for that is a lot of the countries that make this coffee make it in places where they don't have the same level of oversight that you do in the States. So, I've seen endosulfane, glyphosate, pesticides that really would never be allowed in the US being sprayed on coffee. And it's not necessarily the farmer's fault. I mean, one of the problems is even if their choice is to be organic, there are certain things like coffee berry beetle that can wipe out an entire harvest. And if your income for your family is completely reliant on that harvest coming in, I can certainly see why people make decisions that aren't always in the best interest of the consumer if they feel like, they're not going to be able to bring in the harvest. So that's, I think that's an important factor.
In terms of pesticides, you mentioned, for example, glyphosate. There can be glyphosate in the rainwater. So even though, a product may be supposedly organic, and I've seen organic rules where, you're allowed to bend the rules, when you're planting, or, they may not be as strict as you or I would want it to be. So I think it's amazing that you're testing, and what you're testing is actually confirms the marketing from the farmers that, yes, this actually is organic, no pesticides.
And that's the reason we have the oversight, because there is a possibility that, runoff is another way that you can get, from a nearby farm. I mean, if you could be organic, your nearby farm isn't, then you can have runoff that impacts the crop. So we do a pesticide residue test as well. Not only do we only buy organic coffee, but we test for 850, I think, pesticide residues. And we have that panel to prove or to show that it's pesticide free, because if you look at all the things that we care about when it comes to coffee and health, some of our decisions were really difficult decisions, like, how do we roast coffee in the best way? What is the soil? What is the cultivar? But the easiest decision, the fastest decision we've ever made was, should it be organic or not? Of course, if you care about health, you really have to stipulate that the coffee is organic. And I'd say for anybody listening, that's probably your number one factor is buying coffee that's organic, certified organic.
So now that you know everything, having, started a business organic, what do you do when you're trying to buy produce, fruits and vegetables or other foods for yourself where you don't control? I mean, obviously you probably go for organic, but how do you make sure, now that you've seen what's actually going on behind the scenes?
It's a little bit scary. I mean, when you start to see the results in coffee, I mean, the corners that are cut, and you see the profit motive behind those corners being cut. I mean, you can see that, we've got a certain sense of sort of certainty that our coffee is or our food is going to be organic, but isn't necessarily. But unfortunately, like most people, I'll buy organic and just hope. It's there's nothing that really that I can do on a level apart from we do minimize eating out, my wife and I, and we don't eat out as much just because we're just not so certain that they're preparing the food in a way that's healthy.
Agreed. I do the same thing. How about tell me more about the mold toxins, the mycotoxins? Which ones are you most concerned about, and which ones have you been seeing the most of?
Yeah. So all of this comes down to farming practices. So if you think about mold and mycotoxins, mold can develop in various stages of the processing of coffee. So anytime you use water, it's of humid temperatures. Sacks of coffee stand by the side of the road waiting to be picked up, and then the processing. So mold can develop in lots of different stages. The one of the most difficult or problematic areas that mold can develop is in industrial farming. So it develops because they pick the coffee all at the same time by having this sort of tractor that goes between the coffee trees. It's like a U-shaped tractor, and it shakes the trees and shakes all the berries off the trees at the same time. So you've got overripe, underripe, ripe cherries, you've got twigs, you've got stones, and then it's all sorted out later. The problem is in trying to sort it out later that it can create, once you take a moldy item of food and you put it in a vat that isn't moldy, it doesn't take very long for you to sort of impact the whole vat. So we've got to make sure that mold never develops in the first place, because mold is what leads to mycotoxins, and mycotoxins are like ochratoxin A, which is incredibly bad for the kidneys. That's prevalent in coffee. So step one is make sure there's no mold. Mold by itself, per se, isn't as damaging as the mycotoxins created by the mold. So food safety standards, I mean, everything from the way that the coffee is processed, the amount of time that you leave the coffee before it's sorted and selected and dried, different processing methods. I mean, you really have to be willing to get into the weeds. There's just a lot of detail on
And it's very important because what I've seen many patients with Alzheimer's and other types of dementia with high ochratoxin level A and other mycotoxins, because these are fatty toxins. Yeah. And once they get into the body, they go wherever the fat is, including a fatty organ like the brain. So I think it's amazing that you're doing the filter, you're doing the testing before your customers actually drink it.
It's like you were saying about, other foods we look at in our family. I want to make the decision for health for our customers so they don't have to. I just want to be, with integrity, just do my very best job of making the decision that I would make for my family about what's best for health.
It's about disclosure. And let's talk a little bit more about that with the roasting process, because I never thought about this until I started looking at toxins, neurotoxins like acrylamide. Yeah. And we know now that acrylamide, one of the ways it's produced is by taking a bean or a carbohydrate and heating it to a high temperature. So it sounds like the way that you are trying to minimize the production of acrylamide is not heating the coffee bean too high, not burning it.
It's creating a roasting curve. So we create a roasting curve with the University of Brazil for every harvest of our coffee. And so the sort of things that are at play with this is that, as you said, the Maillard reaction is that it creates acrylamide, and you get that from toasting, and and French fries have acrylamide, that sort of thing. But acrylamide starts high. So in the green bean, it starts high and then it will drop off as you darker roast the coffee. But at the same time, on the other end of that, you have PAHs, which comes from over roasting the coffee. But the antioxidants in the coffee, the CGAs, start at the top with the acrylamide, so they're very parallel, and then they drop down. There is a sweet spot where you have the most amount of antioxidants in the coffee, very low acrylamide, and no PAH. And the other interesting thing, which is that we looked at, is the type of roasting that you use. So there's fluid bed roasters and open bed roasters. There's lots of different ways of roasting coffee. We use basically it's a vacuum roaster. It's a Loring roaster. So it's a low oxygen roaster. And what that does is that keeps the antioxidants in the coffee, but it creates very little acrylamide in the early stage of the roasting. So the roasting matters, and then the roasting curve makes a big difference.
And from my research or understanding, when it comes to acrylamide production, it's both the temperature and time. Yeah. Is that what you mean by the curve, or are you looking at something else?
That's exactly it. So, anytime you roast coffee, most coffee companies, all coffee companies pretty much, are focused just on the taste of the coffee. So their job is take a green coffee and turn it brown, and it needs to taste good. So they have a different lens and a different criteria to look for. So when we talk about a roasting curve, we're talking about the age of the coffee factors into it, the time and the heat that you apply it, and the speed at which you apply that heat or slow it down, and the cooling process. So all of those factor into the sort of coffee that you have at the end, not just for health, but also for taste. And so that's the variables that we try to play with.
Perfect. So I've run into some people who are hyper concerned about acrylamide, may not have yet be familiar with your product and the diligence you do to minimize the acrylamide production. What they actually do is they use green unroasted coffee. That, this sounds crazy, but some of them will actually do coffee enemas. Try to get, what are your thoughts on that?
It's a mixed bag. The problem is it's very high. Green coffee extract, very high in CGAs, a lot higher than obviously in roasted coffee. But then you don't get some of the benefits from a roasted coffee because things are created in the roast. The other thing you have to be careful with is the coffee absolutely needs to be organic. It absolutely needs to be specialty grade. You need to make sure that no mold or mycotoxins have ever developed on the coffee. So if you're using either green coffee extract or you need to make sure it's of the very highest quality, because roasting coffee is a kill step for some of these pathogens, some of these problems that exist in coffee. So if you avoid that step, then you've got to make sure even more that you've got a high quality coffee.
Makes sense. And so what are some of the benefits that people who are just using green coffee are missing out on, besides getting rid of pathogens when you heat it?
Chlorogenic lactones would be the big one. The big one that I would focus on, especially in this conversation about Alzheimer's, because that is something that only develops in the roast, and so that is something that will be missed out in the green coffee. That I think, in terms of inflammation, would have a big impact.
One of the other things that I've seen that coffee increases in people is specifically detoxifier glutathione. Mm-hmm. And why do you think it is that after you drink coffee, your glutathione, which is like the universal detoxifier in our body, why does that go up? Why do you think?
I don't know, honestly. It's something we've looked at, we've been studying. I mean, I think that crosses into the realm where that's probably a better question for a doctor than somebody who's fascinated with the health benefits of coffee. I don't know the mechanistic explanations, but I do know that coffee seems to have a lot of weird health benefits that almost seem unrelated. I mean, they're generic. I mean, even gouts, tooth problems, gouts. I mean, it's just things that you would think would have no relation to each other seem to have a positive impact in coffee. Truth is, we're on the first rung of the ladder. Coffee as a health food as medicine. When it comes to coffee, there is a lot more that we don't know about the health benefits and the mechanistic explanations of coffee than we do. So our starting point is, let's avoid the bad stuff, maximize the good stuff. We know what the good stuff is. We know the things that we want, like the chlorogenic acid, trigonylene, the lipids in the coffee. We know we want to avoid the heavy metals and the pesticides. So what we do is we just focus on those two sort of poles.
Great. So along those lines, if you go to the whole plant, why is it that you're not recommending or eating like the whole coffee berry? Not just the bean, but the sweet, berry outside.
The mucilage, yeah. That might actually change very soon. I think you're a little psychic. We've been looking at leaves, at tea that comes from the leaves of the coffee tree. And we're also looking at cascara, which is the pulp that comes from the coffee, because it's very high in polyphenols. It's really good for you. You can make flour and cookies and that sort of thing out of it. So we're actually playing around with the flour and the leaves to make tea, and also the cascara, but it has to be food safe. So we really would like to look at all parts of the coffee plants. We think that they have different health benefits, and in particular with the tea, it's a very interesting area of study. It'll probably be a next year project for us. We're starting to do all the studies on this right now. That's
exciting. So, Andrew, have you actually given up all teas, or do you still drink tea at all?
Yeah, the other thing is just funny. I drink tea when I'm out. When I'm, I can't bring my coffee with me. I'm staying in a hotel or whatever. I always drink tea because I feel like I can be better assured of the quality of the tea rather than the coffee, because I think I know too much about coffee, unfortunately, now.
Excellent. So shifting gears a little bit, or going back to your company, has your company sponsored any research into coffee and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and other brain problems?
We're sponsoring more in the area of awareness. So, our first step is we want people just to understand, this is all coffee. I mean, these studies, 19,000 studies in coffee and health, were done on a range of coffee. So we're not trying to say pure coffee is the only coffee that can help with this particular thing, but we're trying to show people good things, bad things, how to avoid those too. So we sponsor things like the Alzheimer bike race. We're their primary sponsor in South Carolina. We also give to the foundation. We've tried to do some work in the laboratory in the University of Brazil, but it's really just very early stage yet, because just the discussion about amyloid beta and just tau and whether we've exactly what the relationship is. We know it has a positive effect, but we when it crosses over into that area of exactly why it has a positive effect, it's it's still a blank box.
Interesting. So how many different types of coffee right now are you making? I know you make a decaf with the Swiss water method, which doesn't use any harmful solvents, right? And you've got a regular blend. What other types of coffee, or is it just those two?
So we have three roasts. Ease is a darker roast, so that's higher in chlorogenic lactones. We have Flow, which is our standard coffee, which is very high in antioxidants, but it's a well-balanced coffee. It's probably a good coffee to start with. And Protect is the coffee that we focus on liver awareness. So we've tried to dial up certain compounds very high in CGAs, the highest in CGAs that we have as a coffee, and also focus on different compounds that we think would be valuable to the liver from the help that we've had from Sanjeev and other experts in this.
Go ahead.
Oh, and I was just going to say, and the one really interesting area is that what we're starting to discover is that as you said, not all coffee is created equal. It can be the chlorogenic acids, but what really matters the most to the chlorogenic acids is that varies from crop to crop and harvest to harvest, but coffee that's grown into its natural environments, in other words, where the soil is really rich and it's not dirt, and then we're really feeding the soil, feeds the coffee plants, and that in turn means that it's much more nutrient dense. So we're doing a lot of work on a farm level, including we just invested on our first farm about a year and a half ago, because we wanted to do some of the things that farmers wouldn't do on the farm because they're not incented to do it because people don't give them the money to pay for coffee for health. So what we've done through that investment is start to look at what we can do on a farm level that would increase the positive compounds in the coffee. So that's a very interesting area of exploration.
That's really exciting. So it's kind of vertical integration. You're actually putting your resources to make sure that, from plant to the end product, that you can control as much as possible.
It was really the only way that we could do that is work with very tight collaboration with the farmers that we buy from, and also the farm Monte Benito that we've purchased, is so that we could start to do some exploration and pay for those farmers to do innovations that they wouldn't normally do. So we do a lot of, methane digesters. We do things that are good for the environment and also good for the soil quality. But we pay for them because we want to measure what the real impact is on your cup of coffee in the end. It's one of the reasons why we're so focused on measurements. We've got to understand the trend line. We've got to understand what's working and what's not, what we do on the farm level, on the processing level, and on the roasting level that impacts the health benefits of coffee.
And I noticed when looking at the data on your website, not just with your own coffee, you identify your coffees, but it seems like your competitors, you don't name them. Is that because you don't want to get sued, or is it...
It's just a fundamental belief that we have that the better quality coffee you drink, the better it is for your health. So we're not trying to say coffee is bad for you apart from us. We're saying the coffee is incredibly good for you. It's incredibly well supported in terms of the studies on coffee. Anybody who's doing a credible job, we welcome them. I mean, we want to focus on what we're doing and improve the quality of what we're doing. We want people to recognize what the difference is and how it could show up in the lab results. But in no way do we want to badmouth people who are trying earnestly to improve coffee for health.
And are you ever offered coffee that you end up rejecting for whatever reason?
Oh yeah, 90% of coffee doesn't reach our 99% of coffee doesn't reach our standards. It's only it can take us a full year, 2 years to find an additional farm that we want to collaborate with. There's a lot in that criteria that we look for. I mean, it has to be. We look for certain monikers, certain labels. We look for things like hand-picked, hand-selected, Smithsonian bird-friendly, shade-grown, and all of these are used in the coffee industry because they represent good organic coffee. But for us, it shows that the coffee is grown in its natural environments. So if it's not machine picked, it means it's up a hill. If it's hand picked, hand selected, it means that it's more manual. Smithsonian bird friendly means birds land on the trees, migratory birds land on the trees, and that shows that the coffee is grown in its natural environments. So the selection process is really, it's a long, deep breath for Ildi Revi, who's our head of coffee. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, but just for people watching, my concern is looking at all the other coffees you tested. The vast majority have high levels of mold toxins and a lot of these different pesticides. So to me, that's an important message for people, I think.
I think so. I think the job to be done here is to encourage farmers to make the move to farming practices they know are good for the coffee. The problem is if we keep paying coffee based on New York spot and we treat it like a commodity, then farmers treat it like a commodity. And so the problem is we're going to have a lot of corners cut because they can save money and they can still get the same price for their product. So we have to recognize that coffee is good for health and then be willing to pay a little bit more for coffee that reaches that standard because, you've got those farmers that are going to cut corners because, it's basically their single source of income.
100%. And you want a coffee that's high in the chlorogenic acid And the reason it's called chlorogenic acid, my understanding, there's no chlorine, but it actually looks green when is that right?
That's right. Yeah, it's very funny. It's funny. I don't know much about the history of how it was named, but yeah, it's certainly what's really interesting about this conversation in coffee, or at least to me, is there's this big conversation about low acid coffee. You need to have low acid coffee because it's good for health. And the reality is the opposite is true. You want a clean coffee so you don't have any of the side effects that poor coffee has, and the jitters, the nervousness, that sort of thing. But it's not actually low in acid. You want it to be high in the acids you care about. So the chlorogenic acids and trigonylate and other compounds should be high. But what people are really saying when they say they want a low acid coffee is just that they want a coffee that doesn't bother them. Low acid is not the right label.
Right. And what I think I'm hearing you say is that unlike other brands of coffee, that when people start drinking your coffee, they don't often get reflux like they will with some of the other brands of coffee.
Yeah, I mean, I would challenge anybody, listening to this, try our coffee. If for any reason you have any side effects that you would normally have with coffee, send it back. And please give us some feedback and tell us that was an issue. Typically, and now over 6 years of working with customers, we see that the effects of coffee, people put down the coffee, they go, I have jitters, nervousness, acid reflux, acid indigestion, all of these things that they think are a result of coffee are a result of poor quality coffee. We don't know exactly. It could differ for different people. So it could be you're sensitive to pesticide residues. It could be you're sensitive in coffee to, the staling of the lipids if it's a little bit older, or some of the mold or mycotoxins in the coffee, or even stale coffee. A lot of people drink coffee that is stale because it's been roasted months ago, especially store-bought coffee. So we don't know the exact reason, but I can tell you, after making every decision based on health, while we don't know exactly what the one decision could be, it could be a multiple, those decisions mean that you shouldn't get jitters, nervousness, acid reflux, any of the problems that cause people to give up coffee, like my wife initially was suggested to do.
Now let me ask you, because one of the things that we're finding that helps to prevent Alzheimer's and some of the other brain disorders is making sure you have enough sleep. For coffee with caffeine in it, what is your strategy there? I'm assuming you're not drinking coffee right before you go to sleep. You're drinking it first thing in the morning, or what is your personal strategy with timing of coffee?
Yeah, so people are typically divided into two categories. They're fast metabolizers of caffeine or slow metabolizers of caffeine. I'm a fast metabolizer of caffeine. I can drink a double espresso as a digestive at the end of a meal, and I can go to sleep, and I just don't have any problems with that. There's some people that can have a coffee at 1 o'clock and they're up all night as a result of that. So I would say, watch your body, pay attention to your body. I typically only drink coffee in the morning, but I get my 3 cups of coffee during the day, and that's fine. I mean, I agree with you. I think, especially as I get older, sleep is more and more important. And even though I'm a fast metabolizer of caffeine, I prefer not to drink coffee later. But as long as I'm getting my coffee in the mornings, then I'm happy.
The other strategy is with caffeine or other stimulants. If people use it right before they work out, they often will have a better workout. I'm assuming you exercise.
Yeah.
Do you find you use coffee right before you exercise, or not so much?
I like to, but that could be coincidence that I'm always exercising in the morning and I'm always drinking coffee in the morning. But, I mean, it's one of the few substances that is allowed in the Olympics, but regulated. So in other words, I mean, you've got to imagine that it obviously has real effects if athletes are told you can have up to this, but not more than this caffeine or coffee or that sort of thing. So it definitely works. And it also works in terms of anti-inflammation, because after the exercise, your body is better able to repair and avoid the inflammation that you get from the exercise.
Fascinating. So wrapping up, what would you say are 3 takeaways for someone who's trying to reverse or prevent Alzheimer or other dementia or brain disorders? How would you summarize it for people?
The three things to look for. The three things to focus on, I would say, is that coffee has protective impacts against Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's. But protective means the goal is to reduce inflammation in the brain before it develops to a high point. So a regular daily habit of coffee, I think, is important. I think the quality of your coffee is important, just because inflammation is caused by, the poor farming practices that coffee can go through, and that's going to react negatively in your body. And just as you said, with some of the side effects, if your body is getting side effects from your coffee, you're probably getting inflammation caused by the coffee. But then the good side is the chlorogenic acids that come from that. If you really want to give the most bang for the buck, don't have this fighting system between those things that are causing inflammation and those things that reduce it. So quality of the coffee has to be organic, has to be specialty grade, the highest grade of coffee. Try to get your coffee that's farmed as close to the natural environment as possible. And I recommend a medium to dark roast. The problem with recommending that is people roast their coffee with different machines and in different ways. But just you really want to focus. If you're out and about, looking for a cup of coffee, a medium roast coffee is your best bet. So organic, specialty grade, medium roast coffee needs to be fresh. You don't want to have stale lipids on the coffee. And probably the third thing is enjoy it. Given the fact that this is something that most coffee drinkers do every single day, make sure it's a pleasurable experience. It's something that you want to do. The more pleasurable it is, the more you'll do it, the more it'll help on a sort of dose-dependent way in reducing risk.
That's awesome. And if people want to find your product, what is your website?
The website's puritycoffee.com, so www.puritycoffee.com. And there's a lot of information there, and we love to answer questions. So we've got some very skilled people in terms of customer service and science of coffee. Nothing is too esoteric for us. We love to field questions, and please give us a shout and ask your questions about what we do and what we do differently and why.
That's awesome. And if people want to find you on social media, are you on social media? And if so, how can they find you?
We are, and I should know this. I think it's just a search for Purity Coffee. I think it's that simple.
Andrew, thank you so much. This has been, I feel like I just, drank from a garden hose of so amazing information. I've really learned so much about coffee. I've been lecturing to the public for years, and coffee comes up, but I feel like I now have so much more ammunition and knowledge to share. So I really want to thank you for your time and sharing your expertise today.
Oh, my pleasure. It's an interesting subject. It really is.
Thanks.